Your family owned at least one of these. Your parents demonstrated it at a dinner party and never touched it again. Between 1972 and 1979, American manufacturers built a dedicated appliance for every kitchen task imaginable. Here are 30 weird kitchen gadgets from the 1970s that made absolutely no sense. The Presto hot dogger landed in American kitchens in 1974, and the concept demands a grudging respect. You impaled a hot dog on sharp metal prongs, closed the lid, and plugged the unit into a wall outlet. 120 volts passed directly through the meat. 60 seconds later, it was cooked. National Presto Industries, based in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, never mentioned in their advertising the visible RC discharge at the prongs. They never mentioned the acrid smell of protein scorching against the electrode tips or the metallic aftertaste at the ends where current entered the meat. The company discontinued the hot dogger around 1977. The documented reason was that owners forgot the unit was plugged in. A forgotten hot dogger did not turn itself off. It kept delivering current until the hot dog split, smoked, and, in multiple reported cases, caught fire. It sold at Woolworths for under $20, with no functioning safety interlock and no minimum age restriction on the packaging. The Veg-O-Matic was the television promise that sold a generation. Ron Popeil put it on late-night TV from the mid-1960s onward, but it reached household saturation in the early 1970s when Ronco's direct marketing machine was at full speed. It slices. It dices. 2 minutes of demonstration. Potatoes and cucumbers were driven through a circular plastic frame holding 2 sets of crossed steel blades, the vegetables falling apart into perfect pieces. It cost $9.95. The blades had no guard. The plastic frame flexed under pressure. The gap between a controlled push and an uncontrolled one was quite literally razor thin. Ron Popeil sold more than 9 million units. Dan Aykroyd parodied the concept on Saturday Night Live in 1976 with his Super Bass-O-Matic sketch. He blended a whole live fish into a beverage, and the audience needed no explanation because the Veg-O-Matic had become American shorthand for a gadget that overpromised. A redesigned version is now in the Smithsonian alongside the Barbie doll. The injury records are not preserved anywhere. Ronco released the inside-the-shell electric egg scrambler in 1978, and describing it accurately still sounds like a fabrication. It required 6C batteries. A thin metal pin on a small motor was inserted through a hole. It punched in the narrow end of an uncracked egg. The pin spun, blending yolk and white inside the sealed shell, theoretically producing a golden egg, uniform yellow throughout, and you could boil and slice it cleanly. In practice, the torque of 6 batteries through a steel pin on a hollow calcium carbonate shell was unpredictable. The shell tended to implode at the insertion point. When it worked, the resulting egg had the rubbery texture of steam table cafeteria scrambled eggs. Shaking the uncracked egg vigorously in your hand for 30 seconds produced the same result, with 0 batteries and 0 risk of shell fragments. Ronco advertised it as a great Christmas gift. It later ranked 84th on Mobile magazine's list of the top 100 gadgets of all time. The combination electric can opener and knife sharpener was sold as a 2-for-1 solution to 2 real kitchen problems. General Electric introduced a prominent model in 1970, and Daisy, Black & Decker, and Sunbeam all followed, every version available in avocado green or harvest gold. The can opener worked adequately. The knife sharpener removed metal from blades at a fixed angle with no pressure control, producing an uneven bevel that degraded the knife's geometry with each pass. Professional sharpeners warned about this for years. The appliance was never recalled and never required to carry a damage warning. It sat in its harvest gold casing, performing one task adequately and one task destructively. Millions of households owned one. Most assumed their kitchen knives simply wore out faster than expected and bought new ones. Before the gadget arms race had defined the decade, one appliance arrived that genuinely solved a real problem, and that is precisely what makes its history interesting. The rival manufacturing company of Kansas City, Missouri, debuted the Crockpot at Chicago's National Houseware Show in 1971. Rival had purchased the original design, the Naxon Beanery, from retiring inventor Irving Naxon in 1970, and nearly discarded it. A test kitchen home economist named Marilyn Neal recognized the ceramic-lined cooker could prepare entire family meals. Rival rebranded it, wrote recipe booklets, dressed it in avocado and harvest gold, and marketed it to working women with the slogan, "Give yourself time, turn yourself loose." First-year sales reached $2 million. By 1975, $93 million. It worked. It is now in the National Museum of American History. Marilyn Neal is almost unknown outside food history circles. Irving Naxon, who held the original patent and sold the design for cash at retirement, never received a cent of the $93 million. In October of 1972, Vincent Marotta and Samuel Glazer of Cleveland, Ohio, launched Mr. Coffee, and the percolator's 60-year hold on American kitchens effectively ended. The original machine retailed at $39.99, roughly $230 today, and sold 1 million units by April of 1974. By Christmas of 1977, department stores were moving 40,000 machines a day. Joe DiMaggio, signed as pitchman in 1973, added credibility advertising money alone cannot buy. The drip system, with water at 200 degrees Fahrenheit passing through grounds once, produced measurably better coffee than the percolator, which cycled the same water through the same grounds until the result turned bitter and dark. Mr. Coffee captured more than 50% of the automatic coffee maker market by decade's end. The patent on the brewing mechanism belonged to Westinghouse engineer Edward Abel, not to Marotta. In a 1979 Forbes profile, Marotta compared his own creativity to Michelangelo. He did not mention Abel. The electric fondue pot was the 1970s dinner party's defining gamble, a pot of boiling cooking oil at the center of a table surrounded by guests with metal forks. The thermostat dial on electric models replaced earlier alcohol burners and implied careful temperature management. Hot oil fondue required cooking fat heated to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, with every guest managing their own raw protein in a shared vessel while holding a conversation. The long metal forks theoretically kept hands clear, but they conducted heat up the handle after 30 seconds of immersion. The unshielded heating coil, thin metal pot, and absence of any splash barrier meant that a tipped unit produced a sustained high-temperature liquid spill. No recall was ever issued. No federal regulation required specific warning labels for fondue oil temperature. The sets are still sold with instructions essentially unchanged from 1974. The Countertop milkshake maker arrived in home kitchens in the early 1970s with genuine soda fountain credentials. Hamilton Beach and Waring led the market. The metal mixing cup, vertical stainless spindle, and single-speed motor produced a smoother shake than a blender with better air incorporation. That part worked. The failure was structural. The motor housing sat directly above the open top of the mixing cup with no sealed barrier between them. Splatter from an overfilled cup traveled up the spindle and into the motor interior, where dairy fat and moisture met an electric motor running at high revolutions per minute. The deterioration was slow and invisible. These machines had been engineered for commercial diners for dozens of servings a day, and they were maintained by technicians. In a home kitchen, used occasionally and stored between uses, the motor failed from the inside. Most owners assumed ordinary wear. It was not ordinary wear. The countertop popcorn popper was the purest expression of the 1970s kitchen philosophy. Every food deserves its own dedicated appliance. West Bend's Buttermatic had a transparent dome lid so you could watch the kernels fly and a mechanical stirring arm to prevent burning. Hamilton Beach released a competing model endorsed by New York Jets quarterback Joe Namath, whose commercial relationships in this period also included pantyhose, a range that demonstrated versatility, if nothing else. The Buttermatic's stirrer genuinely reduced unpopped kernels, but the transparent plastic dome was not rated for sustained exposure to oil vapor at cooking temperatures. With regular use, it clouded, yellowed, and developed hairline cracks invisible without close examination. The unit held hot oil in a household with children. Commercial microwave popcorn began appearing in American grocery stores by the late 1970s. The countertop oil popper, the entire theatrical apparatus of it, was gone within a decade. The cookie press, also sold as the cookie gun, a product name that has not improved with age, was a staple of American holiday kitchens from the 1950s through the 1970s. Wherever dominated the market, the device was a cylindrical barrel with interchangeable end discs and a trigger mechanism that extruded shaped dough directly onto a baking sheet. Star, Christmas tree, flower, crescent. The instruction manual covered one critical detail across 2 full pages of small print. The dough had to be spritz formula at a specific temperature, or nothing worked. Too warm, the shape spread. Too cold, the barrel clogged. Wrong fat ratio, the shape collapsed entirely. Television advertisements showed a woman pressing perfect trees in 2 seconds each, with no mention of the 2 pages of small print. Most families tried it once, produced a sheet of shapeless blobs, and decided the device was broken. It was not broken. By the time every food had claimed its own appliance, the Salton Corporation of New York had found a stranger market. Americans convinced that grocery store yogurt could not be trusted. The Salton yogurt maker, introduced around 1974 and now in the Smithsonian Institution's Food History Collection, was a low-watt warming base with a row of small glass jars. You added whole milk and a tablespoon of live culture yogurt as starter, filled the jars, and let fermentation proceed for 8 to 12 hours. The result was real live culture yogurt that tasted genuinely unlike commercial brands. It worked as advertised. What neither Salton nor the device could control was biology. A contaminated culture, degraded starter, or off-temperature milk could produce a failed batch that looked identical to a successful one. The Salton instructions addressed contamination risk in one brief paragraph. Commercial yogurt expanded through the late 1970s, making home fermentation redundant, and the machine disappeared with the counterculture conviction that had made it seem necessary in the first place. The electric knife was patented in 1964, and by the early 1970s, the buzzing of its twin reciprocating blades across a Thanksgiving turkey had become a generational dinner signal. Sunbeam, General Electric, and Rival competed on blade length and motor power. The idea was that the motor compensated for uncertain carving skill by maintaining blade speed regardless of hand pressure. The blade guard was a plastic clip used only during storage. When the knife was in use, the guard was in a drawer. The twin blades moved in opposite directions at speed, and they required both hands on the handle and a stable surface. Those conditions were not always present at a crowded holiday table with children nearby. Consumer Reports issued specific handling guidance by the mid-1980s after electric knife injuries had accumulated enough data to analyze. The blades were never regulated beyond basic electrical safety standards. Electric knives are still manufactured, and they are still given as Christmas gifts by relatives who remember the buzzing-sounding impressive in 1973. One popular model from the Salton Corporation in the mid-1970s came with a dial. Not a temperature dial or a speed dial, a texture dial. Smooth on one end, chunky on the other. The Salton peanut butter machine accepted raw peanuts at the top and produced fresh nut butter from a spout at the bottom. And the texture dial was the feature that sold it. The concept traced back to the 1890s, when Joseph Lambert at John Harvey Kellogg's Health Sanatorium in Battle Creek, Michigan, adapted a meat grinder to process peanuts for patients requiring soft food. By the 1970s, electric countertop versions were marketed to households as the freshest, most natural alternative to commercial peanut butter. The problem was that freshly ground peanut butter, made without commercial stabilizers, separated within days. Oil rose to the surface. Solid settled at the bottom. If the jar was not stirred vigorously before each use, the texture dial's promise was irrelevant. The manufacturer did not emphasize this in the advertising. If you ate lobster in a suburban American home during the 1970s, there was a device on the table keeping a small pot of melted butter warm. Sometimes it was ceramic over a candle, a tea light in a housing, butter held at around 140 degrees Fahrenheit above an open flame. Sometimes it was an electric version, a small metal bowl with a low watt coil, a dial, and a pour spout sitting on the table surface. The candle versions placed a naked flame on a linen-covered table next to cracking tools and guests who were not watching the flame. The electric versions solved the fire concern and introduced an unguarded low-watt heating coil within 6 inches of wine glasses and table guests. Neither version was recalled. Neither required specific safety labeling beyond standard electrical ratings. Both are still manufactured and sold today. The candle model in particular remains available in essentially the same design it had in 1973. If the butter warmer represents the era's tolerance for open flames at dinner tables, the egg coober represents its conviction that nature had gotten the egg shape wrong. The egg coober was a small plastic mold imported from Japan, designed to make a square egg. You placed a freshly peeled, hot, hard-boiled egg inside, pressed the lid down, and the egg cooled in the shape of a cube. The resulting square egg could be sliced into uniform pieces for salads, stacked or displayed. Round sliced eggs served identical functions in salads. Round eggs stack in bowls. No documented problem existed that the square egg solved. It was manufactured, imported, and sold in American department stores throughout the decade and reviewed in homemaking publications as a useful modern kitchen addition. It is now held in museum collections as a near-perfect artifact of the era's solution-seeking gadgetry. The egg coober made no sense in 1973 and makes no more sense today, which is precisely why it became a collector's item. The color was avocado green, and from roughly 1966 through the late 1970s, it appeared on essentially every major kitchen appliance sold in America. Refrigerators, dishwashers, ranges, countertop mixers, blenders, toasters, KitchenAid, Sunbeam, General Electric, and Whirlpool all produced coordinated lines in avocado green alongside harvest gold and burnt orange, ensuring that a family who bought a matching kitchen suite in 1972 would own appliances they could not replace individually without creating a visible mismatch. When design trends shifted toward white in the early 1980s, every avocado green appliance in America became outdated simultaneously. The appliances had not worn out. The motors still ran. The refrigerators still cooled. But the color had expired, and replacing one appliance at a time meant owning a white refrigerator beside a harvest gold range beside an avocado dishwasher, which the same manufacturers who had sold the original coordinated suite declared unacceptable. The industry sold the same families a new kitchen. Twice. The salad spinner received its first United States patent in 1973, and for the remainder of the decade, it was among the most enthusiastically promoted gadgets in American homemaking publications and housewares catalogs. The device used a hand crank or pull cord mechanism to spin a perforated inner basket inside a sealed outer bowl, throwing water off washed lettuce leaves by centrifugal force. It worked well, and it solved a genuine problem. Wet lettuce refuses to hold dressing. The issue was size. The salad spinner was a large plastic drum that occupied significant cabinet space for a tool used once or twice a week at most. By the early 1980s, it had migrated from the counter to the back of the cabinet. A significant number of American adults today report owning a salad spinner they have not used in years and cannot bring themselves to discard, a product so useful in theory and so inconvenient in practice that it has been suspended in permanent storage for decades. Before the refrigerator with a built-in ice dispenser became standard, an American household that wanted crushed ice for cocktails had to make it, and the rival Ice-O-Mat was the device sold for that purpose. A countertop unit with a hand crank on one side and a metal crushing mechanism inside, it accepted ice cubes at the top and produced coarse, crushed ice from the bottom into a waiting glass. Some models added a small electric motor to eliminate the crank. The Ice-O-Mat worked because the post-war American cocktail culture assumed crushed ice was essential to a properly made drink, and the domestic refrigerator had not yet addressed that assumption. Rival, the same Kansas City company that sold you the Crockpot, the electric knife, and the fondue pot, made the ice crusher, the can opener, and the carving knife. They had an appliance for every step of the meal. The built-in refrigerator ice maker became standard in the early 1980s and eliminated the product category entirely, overnight, without a single regulatory action. The vibrating electric carving fork was sold as the natural companion to the electric carving knife, on the logic that if one piece of holiday carving equipment had a motor, the other should too. The fork had 2 or 3 tines and a small vibrating motor in the handle, activated by a button. The official purpose was to hold the roast steady while the carving knife moved beside it. The fork vibrated, but the roast, weighed by its own mass, did not particularly respond. The actual stabilizing work was done by the user's hand pressing down, which was equally effective with a standard non-vibrating fork from any kitchen drawer at no additional cost. The vibrating fork was sold in matched sets with the electric knife, in the same hard plastic carrying case, in the same avocado green or harvest gold. Sunbeam and General Electric both offered versions. It required its own power source. It performed no function that a standard table fork did not perform at zero cost. It disappeared from kitchen shelves by the early 1980s without ceremony. And if the vibrating fork demonstrates the era's habit of motorizing things that needed no motor, the Ronco bottle and jar cutter demonstrates something more direct, a consumer product whose primary output was a razor-sharp glass edge inside a home. Sold by Ron Popeil's Ronco company in the mid-1970s, the device was a small tabletop scoring tool. You inserted a glass bottle, scored it at the desired cut line, then applied alternating heat and cold. The instructions suggested a hot towel, then cold water, repeated until thermal stress cleanly separated the glass at the score line. Ronco marketed this as a crafting tool, suggesting you could turn used wine bottles into decorative vases and mason jars into drinking glasses. The marketing did not prominently mention the condition of the cut edge after separation, which was a fresh glass fracture as sharp as any edge glass can produce, and it required careful sanding with wet, dry sandpaper before the object was safe to handle or drink from. The instructions included this step. The advertisements did not. Ronco sold the product through standard retail channels to any customer without restriction. 2 million American households bought the Dial-O-Matic food slicer, largely because Ron Popeil demonstrated it on television with the same technique that had moved the Veg-O-Matic. The Dial-O-Matic was a flat slicer with an adjustable thickness dial and a horizontal sliding action, an early mandolin slicer at the mass market price of around $4 in the early 1960s, still selling through the following decade. Unlike the Veg-O-Matic's downward push, the Dial-O-Matic required you to slide food horizontally across an exposed cutting blade at whatever thickness the dial selected. The blade was fixed. A plastic food holder kept your fingers clear, in theory. As the food decreased in size, the gap between the holder and the cutting edge narrowed, and the final few slices required grip pressure. The plastic holder was not designed to maintain cleanly. Modern mandolin slicers are routinely sold today with cut-resistant gloves included as standard accessories. The Dial-O-Matic came with a recipe booklet and nothing else. 2 million households, one recipe booklet. "Hey, good looking. We'll be back to pick you up later." That was the line in Ronco's television commercial, released in 1978. In the ad, a young man leaned out of a passing convertible and broadcast the line over the car's radio to a woman on the sidewalk. Mr. Microphone was a handheld wireless microphone that transmitted a low-power FM signal to any radio tuned to the right frequency. At $14.95, Ronco marketed it as a home karaoke tool, a party public address system, and entertainment for kids. The transmission range was roughly 100 feet under ideal conditions. The FM frequency it used was not dedicated or protected. It shared the commercial band with actual radio stations and any other device on the same channel. A nearby station or a neighbor's device produced nothing but interference. The commercial was filmed in an open convertible with no radio towers in sight. Ronco sold 1 million units. The electric wok was sold on the promise of restaurant-quality stir-fry, and the 1970s consumer bought it readily. West Bend, Sunbeam, and General Electric all offered countertop electric models through the middle and latter part of the decade. The problem was physics. Authentic stir-fry requires temperatures above 700 degrees Fahrenheit. The seared quality depends on intense, concentrated heat. The average countertop electric wok reached around 400 degrees, and heat was distributed evenly across the surface, which is the opposite of the technique. The food did not sear. It released moisture and stewed at the bottom of a bowl-shaped pan that looked like a wok and cooked like a slow cooker. The brands continued advertising it as a stir-fry appliance for years. The gap between the claim and what happened to the vegetables was never addressed. Long before the restaurant breadbasket, the American dinner table of the 1970s had its own solution for warm bread, the Salton bun warmer, a low-watt electric appliance with a shallow ceramic dish, a domed lid, and a heating element in the base. You placed rolls inside and plugged it in. It worked, and it sat beside the fondue pot and the butter warmer in a dining setup that required approximately 6 electrical outlets to produce one meal. The Salton Corporation's countertop lineup covered every temperature maintenance need a dinner table could generate: food warmer, yogurt fermenter, bun warmer, and in some catalog listings, a dedicated pancake warmer. Each sold separately. Each required its own power cord. Each solved a problem the next Salton product also claimed to solve more efficiently. The Salton Hotray was supposed to consolidate all of it. Where the bun warmer and the butter melter each handled one food type, the Hotray kept an entire meal warm simultaneously on a single flat electric tray. The Salton Corporation introduced the original model in the 1950s and kept it in continuous production through the 1970s and beyond. Units from that era are still operating in American homes today, still plugged in, still reaching temperature 50 years after manufacture. The Consumer Product Safety Commission received reports of Hotray units causing surface burns and table scorching decades after original sale. No recall was issued for the original production run. It is one of the longest continuously manufactured kitchen appliances in American consumer history, which is either a tribute to the design or a record of how long the heating element went unexamined. If you walked into a suburban American kitchen in the 1970s, there was a revolving spice rack somewhere in it. 16 to 24 small labeled glass jars sat on a carousel from Corning or Griffith Laboratories, sold at Sears or JCPenney as a complete set. You bought the rack and all the jars together, which meant you owned paprika and marjoram and celery seed and mace, regardless of whether you had ever cooked with any of them. Research in the late 1970s found that the average household regularly used fewer than 6 of the 24 spices in a standard set. Dried spices lose their volatile oils within 6 to 12 months of opening. The other 18 jars were rotating past at every meal, their contents steadily declining toward flavorlessness. The carousel is still sold. The proportion of untouched jars has not meaningfully changed. The Ronco solid flavor injector was a large syringe with a wide-gauge needle designed to inject butter, garlic, and herb mixtures into the interior of a raw roast, distributing flavor through channels that ran through the meat. Ron Popeil sold it on television in the mid-1970s as a transformation tool for ordinary chicken and pork. The principle was sound. Professional kitchens had used injectors on large cuts for decades. The home version's wide needle created channels that functioned as steam vents during roasting. Moisture migrated out through the injection points, and compound butter ran out through the channels and into the pan before it had finished its work. Whatever remained sealed inside the closing channels during cooking could not be recovered or adjusted after the roast was underway. Ronco's commercial showed the finished roast. It did not show what happened during the hour in between. The Tupperware orange peeler cost nothing, a small curved plastic tool 3 inches long, given free at the door to every party guest. It worked. It was also the opening gesture of a system built entirely on women's social relationships and unpaid labor. The Tupperware party model ran at full saturation through the 1970s. A hostess invited her social circle into her home. A Tupperware representative ran the sales presentation. The hostess received product credit based on purchases, and the guests were the market. The obligation of friendship, the difficulty of sitting in a neighbor's living room and buying nothing, was the engine. Earl Tupper had designed the distribution model in the late 1940s. By the 1970s, it was generating hundreds of millions of dollars annually. The orange peeler at the door had no price. The social arrangement that placed it there cost considerably more. Baconer was an electric bacon cooker sold in the late 1970s. Its operating principle was straightforward. Raw bacon was draped vertically over a heated rack inside a plastic housing, and rendered fat fell freely into a collection tray below. The Teflon-coated rack was the selling point. The plastic outer housing was the engineering problem. Consumer appliance testing found that the housing temperature during normal operation exceeded the manufacturer's rated tolerance for the plastic near the collection tray. The base of the unit was running above its own specified heat limits. The Baconer was discontinued after a brief market run. It appeared in kitchen catalogs, was received as a gift, stored in cabinets, and eventually discarded. No formal recall accompanied its departure from the market. It simply stopped being sold after 1 year, and nobody noticed. Harvest Gold was a color, and between 1964 and the early 1980s, it was the color of the American kitchen. General Electric, Whirlpool, Frigidaire, and KitchenAid manufactured refrigerators, dishwashers, and ranges in it, and the marketing presented color coordination as a mark of sophistication. A kitchen that did not coordinate had not been properly considered. The appliances worked. The compressors ran for decades. None of that mattered when the design shifted. By 1984, Harvest Gold was finished. White became the neutral default, stainless steel the aspirational standard, and every functioning Harvest Gold refrigerator became a renovation target, not because it had failed, but because it had succeeded at being exactly what the manufacturer told you to want. The industry that created the color also sold the replacement. Every decade trusts something it should not. If any of these gadgets lived in your kitchen, tell us which one below.